In the final days of World War II, as the world witnessed the collapse of the Third Reich, something even darker was unfolding deep within the Owl Mountains of Lower Silesia. Under direct orders from Hitler, an army of raw forced laborers, including white prisoners of war and concentration camp detainees, dug feverishly into the earth. Exhausted bodies fell where they stood, and those who couldn't keep up simply disappeared. The world knew about bombings, extermination camps, and brutal battles, but no one knew what was being built beneath the surface. Massive tunnels stretched underground, like the roots of something alive and hungry, growing with no clear purpose, at least not officially. Project Reese, one of the largest and most mysterious Nazi constructions, was never completed. The documents were burned, the engineers vanished, the soldiers who knew too much were silenced. But what exactly was Project Reese? The official explanations vary. Some say it was meant to be a massive headquarters for Hitler, a place where the Führer could retreat if Berlin fell. Others believe it was designed as an enormous underground factory, safe from Allied bombings, where the Nazis planned to build their wonder weapons, Wunderwaffe, missiles, advanced jets, and possibly even weapons of mass destruction. But what if the true purpose of Project Reese was something far greater? Something that, even today, continues to shape human history. I always thought war was the closest thing to hell a man could experience, but I was wrong. There are things worse than bullets whizzing past your head or landmines waiting for your next step. There are things that defy all logic, things that twist your mind in on itself, things that leave a hole in your soul where certainty used to be. My name is James Caldwell. In February 1945, I was a major in the U.S. Army. I'm not the kind of guy who questions orders, and I had seen enough to know that some things are better left unknown. But this mission should have never happened. The orders came from high command. Me and my team, 6 hand-picked men, were sent to infiltrate a Nazi underground complex called Project Reese, hidden deep in the mountains of Poland. The briefing was straightforward. The Germans were working on something big, something that could change the course of the war, and it wasn't just advanced technology. It was something that shouldn't even exist. We weren't given many details. All we knew was that our objective was to locate and retrieve a piece of experimental technology before the Soviets found it. A craft. Yeah, you heard me right. Not a plane, not a bomber, but something that, according to reports, wasn't from this world. The Nazis had found this thing somewhere. We didn't know where. We didn't know how, but the reports mentioned something disturbing. German soldiers were going insane inside those caves. Intercepted documents described men hearing voices, seeing visions, killing each other without explanation. One SS commander wrote about soldiers who became idle and empty, as if their souls had been drained to another place. I wanted to brush it off, to tell myself this was just another dirty job in a war that had already devoured millions. But something in the colonel's tone made me hesitate. He spoke quietly, avoided eye contact. It was like he didn't believe his own words. The next day, we deployed to Poland. Me, Parker, Ramirez, Miller, Donovan, Ellis, and our engineer, a scrawny guy named Harris. The job was simple. Get in. Find whatever the hell this craft was. Get out. It sounded easy. But deep down, I knew. We were walking straight into the mouth of hell. I just didn't know. Hell was already waiting for us. They say that before a man dies, he feels the weight of his entire life on his shoulders. I think that's bullshit. Because what I felt that day, when I took my first step into those tunnels, wasn't the weight of my past. It was the weight of something that should have never been awakened. We moved in silence. The flashlights mounted on our rifles cut through the darkness like thin blades, revealing damp, cavernous walls and cracked, decayed concrete. Project Reese was a beast of stone, carved out by forced laborers and prisoners of war. Miles of tunnels stretched beneath the earth, like the veins of a buried corpse, and now we were walking through them. What unsettled me wasn't the environment. It wasn't the thought of running into Nazis still hiding inside. It was the silence. Absolute silence. If there's one thing I learned in combat, it's that abandoned places don't stay silent. There's always the sound of wind slipping through an opening, the faint echo of your own breath, the groan of an old structure settling. But here, nothing. It was like the sound itself had been swallowed. We walked for about 10 minutes before we found the first body, a man in a white lab coat, a Nazi scientist. He was slumped against the wall, eyes wide open and dry, as if they had been burned out from the inside. His fingers were curled inward, twisted, nails buried in his own throat, but there was no sign of struggle, no wounds, no blood. Ramirez, the biggest skeptic among us, cursed under his breath and spat on the floor. Bastard probably poisoned himself. No one answered, because we all felt it. That man didn't just die, he died of fear. We kept moving. More bodies appeared, scattered along the corridors. SS soldiers, engineers, more scientists. Some were charred, like they had been caught in a fire that never happened. Others had simply stopped moving, frozen mid-action like statues. And then, we heard it. A low sound, distant, somewhere between a whisper and an underground wind. James. I spun around instantly, rifle raised, but there was nothing there. James. My blood turned to ice. The voice knew my name, and I wasn't the only one who heard it. Miller looked at me, pale. What the hell was that? No one answered. The whisper stopped as suddenly as it came. But one thing was clear. We weren't alone. Harris, the engineer, pointed at a set of reinforced doors at the end of the corridor. If these Nazis were protecting something, it's in there. I wish I could say I hesitated before moving forward, that I thought about turning back. But I'd be lying. My body moved on its own, like something was calling us, and we obeyed. If there's one thing worse than finding Nazi corpses dead in unexplainable ways, it's discovering what they were trying to hide. The reinforced doors led us to an archive room. This wasn't just storage. This was the center of it all. Shelves had been overturned, papers scattered across the floor, some of them stained with bloody handprints. In the corner, a film projector spun with no reel, its flickering light dancing against the cracked wall. Parker shut the machine off. They left in a hurry. Donovan sifted through the papers while Ellis searched the drawers, pulling out small film reels and audio recordings marked with strange symbols. None of this should exist. Ramirez grabbed one of the reports and started reading out loud. His voice, steady at first, grew more hesitant with each word. Test struck to 12, subject exposed to the influence field for 37 minutes. Initial signs, mild discomfort and disorientation. At 42 minutes, subject begins speaking in an unknown language, repeating patterns. At 46 minutes, subject stops talking and stares at the wall without blinking. At 50 minutes, subject begins to cry. At 52 minutes, subject tears out their own eyes. Ramirez lowered the paper. No one spoke. Harris rummaged through the equipment and found something. A journal. The leather cover was worn. The pages smelled of mold and rust. It belonged to one of the scientists. We made a mistake. We thought it was a machine. But it's not. Not completely. It thinks, it feels, and it knows we're here. A chill ran down my spine. Ellis loaded one of the audio tapes into the player. A burst of static filled the room, followed by a shaky voice speaking in German. A scientist's log. The shadows. They move when we're not looking. They change the structure around us. We locked the artifact away, but it already sees us. Even now, as I speak, I feel like I am no longer myself. I see something inside the others, in their eyes. The recording cut off, replaced by a sound so horrifying it didn't belong to this world. A scream, not human, something deep, warped, impossible to describe. Turn it off, I ordered. Parker hit the switch. Silence. And that's when I noticed. The shelves were different. My mouth went dry. I turned to look down the hallway and saw that the Nazi corpses had moved. I was certain that one of the dead soldiers had been slumped against the wall. Now, he was closer to the door. Parker looked at me, sweat beading on his forehead. "Major, this place is changing." And that's when we realized it wasn't just the Nazis who had been watched, and now it was us. The worst thing that can happen during a mission is losing your sense of direction. The moment that happens, there's no difference between a Nazi tunnel and a tomb. Our maps told us the complex had a predictable layout, but as we moved through the corridors, something was wrong. The paths didn't match. We marked reference points, scratched numbers on the walls, but when we looked back, they were gone. Miller was the first to notice. "Major, I think we've passed this corridor before." Everyone froze. I looked around, and for a moment I felt that strange sensation, like when you walk into a room and forget why you went there. But that couldn't be right. We were following a linear path. I was about to say something when Parker pointed to the wall. "Is that the mark we left?" The chalk marking that Donovan had made 5 minutes ago. It looked faded, like it had been there for weeks, maybe months. The silence broke when Miller started moving faster, his breath uneven. "Something's wrong. And then he was gone. Just like that. A blink. 1 second he was there. The next, he wasn't." I froze. Everyone froze. "Miller," our voices echoed, and then vanished. Like the walls swallowed the sound. I rushed forward, shining my flashlight in all directions. There was nothing. No sign of struggle, no footprints, just emptiness. And then, it started. Ellis saw it first. "There!" He pointed to a dark corner of the hallway. I turned my flashlight. Nothing. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a silhouette, a body standing at the far end of the corridor, only visible when I wasn't looking directly at it. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. Every instinct screamed, "Don't look." Don't acknowledge it, but the human mind is cruel. It wants to see. And I looked. It was Miller, or something that looked like him. His face was wrong, like a shadow was trapped beneath his skin. His eyes weren't eyes. They were holes, deep, black, empty, like they had been carved out for the sole purpose of seeing nothing. I blinked, and he was gone again. Ramirez whispered a prayer. Harris was pale. Parker gripped his rifle so tightly his fingers trembled. The thing about fear is that it spreads. It takes root inside you, it grows slowly, and in that moment, we knew. Something was pulling us forward, even after what happened to Miller, even with fear spreading inside us. We kept walking, or maybe we were being pushed. I can't say how long it took to reach the hangar. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Time didn't make sense in that place anymore. When we finally passed through a reinforced concrete arch, we saw it, the craft, if you could even call it that. It filled nearly the entire underground hangar, and it didn't look like anything made by human hands. Its black curved hull had an oily sheen, like metal that had never been melted, never forged. The structure looked like it was breathing, like it was alive, like it knew we were there. Looking at it, I felt something strange, a pressure deep in my mind. Like a thought that wasn't mine, pushing slowly, trying to get in. Ramirez choked beside me. "Major, I can't." He fell to his knees, clutching his head. "It's talking to me." The air in the hangar grew heavy. A metallic smell filled the space, like hot iron. Donovan and Ellis began muttering under their breath, not even realizing it. Parker rubbed his eyes like he was struggling to see straight. "Something's wrong," Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This thing, it shouldn't be here. It shouldn't exist." I was about to respond when Ramirez screamed. He shot to his feet, yanking his rifle up, pointing it at us, his eyes wide, his breath frantic. "Don't move!" He was shaking. "There's something inside you." "Ramirez." I kept my voice steady. "Put the gun down." But he wasn't listening. I saw it in your eyes. His rifle moved between us, finger on the trigger. "You're not you, I know you're not." And then, that thought pushed back into my mind. What if he's right? No. That was insane. I tried to push the thought away, but it was hard, like someone wanted me to believe it. Ramirez clenched his teeth, sweating. It wants us to take it, doesn't it? But we can't. We can't take it. And then, the craft pulsed. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a movement, but we felt it. The ground trembled. A wave of heat rose through the air, and Ramirez went silent. He didn't faint. He didn't scream. He just collapsed, like something had switched him off. And in that moment, I knew. The craft was looking at us. Ramirez lay motionless on the ground. His breathing was shallow, but his face was empty, like something had drained everything he was. No one moved. No one knew what to do. Harris, the engineer, broke the silence. We can't stay here. He knelt beside Ramirez, checking his pulse. He's alive, but something's wrong. Everything's wrong, Parker muttered. The craft, if that's what it was still there. But now, looking at it again, it felt different. I couldn't explain how. But it wasn't the same thing we had seen before. It was like looking into a warped mirror. Every angle revealed something new, something impossible. Sometimes it looked smaller, other times larger, and then, in the blink of an eye, the walls around us changed texture. I gripped my rifle. Harris, can you figure out how to dismantle this thing? He looked at me, pale. Dismantle? He turned back to the craft, studying its dark surface. He ran his hand over it and shuddered. This isn't technology. What the hell are you talking about? He swallowed hard. This is an organism. This thing is alive. The silence felt like a weight pressing down on us. No way, Ellis whispered. Harris stepped back. And there's more. This wasn't built. This didn't come from somewhere else. He turned to me, eyes wide, shaking. It's growing here. My stomach twisted. Then we heard it, a wet, snapping sound, slow, sick. I swung my flashlight toward Donovan. He was standing perfectly still, back to us, not moving. Donovan. My voice shook. He turned, and I saw. His eyes were wrong. So wrong. The light in them, it wasn't human. His face looked too relaxed, like his skin was just a loose mask. He blinked, slowly. Major. His voice was off. Too low, like someone else was speaking through him. Everyone froze. Donovan took a step forward. I may remember things that aren't mine, places I've never seen, but somehow I know them. He stared at his own hands, like he was seeing something we couldn't. I am someone who is not me. My chest tightened. Something was happening to him. To all of us. Ellis dropped to his knees. I don't remember my name. Harris stumbled back, eyes wide. We have to leave. Now. I looked at the craft, at my men, at the dark tunnel behind us. There was no right choice, but we knew one thing. If we hesitated even a second longer, we wouldn't leave this place as ourselves. If I had to describe what we felt in that moment, I'd say it was like being inside the mind of something else. It wasn't fear. It wasn't just madness. It was the feeling of being understood by something that should not exist. The voices became clearer. Before, they were just distant whispers. Now they were speaking to us. Not the way people speak. They didn't come from outside. They came from within. James, a voice whispered. It sounded exactly like mine. My muscles locked up, hearing my own name. Spoken, in a way that only someone who knew me deeply could say. Ramirez, still on the ground, opened his eyes and smiled. It was a strange smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they know something you don't. Harris swallowed hard. This isn't natural. No, Parker said softly. It's not. He was staring at the craft. But not with fear, with fascination. Parker, I called. He didn't answer right away. He blinked a few times like he was coming out of a trance. Then he turned to me. It doesn't want to kill us. Everyone exchanged looks. What the hell are you talking about? Ellis asked, voice trembling. It wants to know who we are. The air felt heavier. It's learning, Parker continued, looking around. We're just as strange to it as it is to us. He pointed at Ramirez. And some of us are starting to understand that. Ramirez let out a low, empty laugh. "It's not so bad. Not so bad," Donovan repeated, horrified. "That's not you talking." Ramirez blinked slowly as if thinking it over. Then he said something none of us expected. "I know." The room fell silent. No one moved. The entity was shaping us. From the inside out, Ellis closed his eyes, muttering something incoherent. His hands trembled, but his face looked peaceful. "Ellis?" I called. He opened his eyes. "I feel like I'm becoming part of something bigger." Something snapped inside me. We had to get out. Now. But before I could say anything, Parker stepped forward and touched the craft. And then, everything went white. For a moment, I felt absolute silence. Like every sound in the world had ceased to exist. My lungs wouldn't pull air. My body suspended between existence and nothingness, and then came the pain. Not physical. A pain in my mind, in my soul, if such a thing exists. It was like someone flipping through my memories, turning each page, studying, rewriting, flashes, my childhood. My training, my first day in the army. My mother smiling, every fear, every hope, every buried thought dragged into the open by something that had no face, but had intention. I felt my consciousness being pulled, like I was being dragged inside that thing. Like a piece of me was being ripped away and absorbed. And then, I came back. My knees hit the ground, my ears rang. Parker stood in front of me, staring, but it wasn't Parker. Not really. Something about him was off. His eyes, they looked deep, darker, filled with an understanding that did not belong to this world. And then, he smiled and I knew it was already too late. I don't think anyone ever really left that place, not completely. I don't remember exactly how it happened. None of us do. But somehow, we made it back to the surface. My last memory inside the tunnels is Parker looking at me. That empty expression. That smile that didn't feel like his. After that, everything became fragments, like a bad dream dissolving the moment you wake up. Flashes, Ramirez being carried, his eyes fixed on nothing. Harris clutching a metallic fragment from the craft, like it was the most precious thing in the world. Donovan muttering nonsense, Ellis's body still moving. But something inside him wasn't there anymore. Time felt distorted. One moment, we were deep inside the tunnels. The next, we were walking through the snow near the extraction point. We didn't remember climbing up. When the helicopters arrived, none of us reacted. It was like we were in a trance. The craft stayed behind, but we brought pieces of it, reports, recordings, metallic fragments that pulsed with a strange warmth. Something else, something invisible, something inside us. The flight back was silent. None of us talked about what happened, maybe because we couldn't. It wasn't until we landed at the US base in Germany that I realized what had really changed. The general met us personally. He looked serious, paler than usual. He didn't ask any questions, he just said we were being taken to a secure location for a special debriefing. They separated us, physical tests, neurological scans. They asked questions we weren't sure how to answer. What did we remember? What did we see? What did we touch? They seemed more worried than we were. Parker was the first to speak, and what he said froze the blood of everyone in the room. "You don't need to worry." His voice was calm. "You've already made the right decision." The general frowned. "What decision?" Parker smiled. "The one you'll make in 2 months." The silence that followed was unbearable. The medical tests increased. They isolated us even more. The questions changed. They no longer cared about what happened. Now, they wanted to know what we knew. I had no answers, but Parker knew. He started saying things he had no reason to know. Coordinates, dates, names of people we had never heard of. Classified information that only the highest-ranking officials should have known. Were they predictions, or was he just remembering something that hadn't happened yet? The days passed, and one by one, my team began to disappear. Ramirez was taken first. They said he had an episode. I never saw him again. Then Donovan vanished. Then Ellis Parker was the last, but he didn't look afraid. He just accepted it. Before they took him, he looked at me and said something that still haunts me. "James, we never really left, did we?" And then, he was gone. I was alone. The official report said we were exposed to natural hallucinogens inside the tunnels. That the craft was never found, that our mission failed. But I know the truth, something came back with us, and whatever it is, it's not done yet. I tried to move on after the mission. I tried to convince myself that everything was left behind, buried in the snow of Poland, sealed inside those tunnels that should have never been opened. But something was wrong. Something in the world had changed. The first signs were subtle. I started noticing patterns in ordinary places, symbols I couldn't understand, but somehow felt familiar. On official documents, in newspapers, even in watermarks on government files. Then, the dreams started. At first, just flashes, a dark, pulsing surface, impossible structures, towers that bent inward, folding into themselves, a starless sky, deep, endless, like space itself was staring back at me. But then, the dreams became real. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, heart pounding. Words from no known language still vibrating in my mind. Time felt unstable. I'd leave a room and forget how I got there. Sometimes a minute stretched into an hour, other times the opposite. I'd stare at the clock, watch the hands move too fast, then suddenly snap back to where they were. And then I noticed, it wasn't just me. An intelligence officer went missing for 2 days, came back with no memory of where he'd been. Another officer, methodical, calculated, precise, started making impulsive decisions, signing documents he swore he had never seen before. Classified reports hinted at technological advancements that made no sense. Experimental devices being developed with surgical precision, but no one could explain how the scientists had reached their conclusions. Brilliant mathematicians solving equations they had no business knowing. Their only answer? I just knew. It was like memories of knowledge that were never ours to begin with. The strangest part? The feeling that someone or something was guiding it all. Military leaders seemed different, colder, more direct, like they were responding to something invisible, something only they could sense. Then, one day, I received an envelope, no return address, inside, just a single piece of paper, 2 handwritten sentences. You feel it too, don't you? The world is not the same anymore. I looked around. A chill ran down my spine. Someone was watching me, or maybe something. The worst part? Deep down, I already knew the truth. The world didn't change on its own. We changed it, the moment we walked out of those tunnels. The years passed, but the feeling never changed. It was like having a shadow that didn't belong to me. Something always there, just at the edge of my vision. Waiting. Watching. After we came back from the mission, my team started disappearing. Not all at once. It happened slowly. Ramirez was the first, officially, suicide. But his body was never found. His apartment was locked from the inside. The table was still set for dinner. The radio was still playing. He was just gone. Harris went next. He quit military engineering and vanished somewhere deep in the countryside. Years later, a farmer found his abandoned car near a frozen lake, engine still running, doors wide open, no trace of him. Donovan died in a car crash, but when paramedics arrived, he was still breathing. His last words were heard by a first responder. "It wasn't a dream. We never left." It finally hit me when Ellis disappeared inside a military base. Security cameras showed him walking down a hallway. He turned a corner, and then he was gone. 4 men, 4 impossible disappearances. Now it was just me and Parker. I tried to stay away from him for years. But one day, he found me. It was at a cafe. No warning. He sat across from me, looking at me like he already knew what I was about to say. "It's happening to you too, isn't it?" I didn't answer. He sighed, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "They don't want to kill us, James." He looked me in the eyes. "They need us." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Who are they?" Parker smiled. That same smile he gave me back in the tunnels. The smile of someone who knew something I never would. You already know. That was the last time I ever saw Parker. Years later, they say he was found wandering a desert highway, dehydrated, no shoes. When the police approached him, he looked up and asked, "What year is this?" And then, it was my turn. Over the past few months, I've felt something getting worse. The dreams have become clearer. Sometimes I wake up and, for a moment, I don't remember who I am. Time feels wrong. Like I'm trapped in a cycle that never began and will never end. So I've decided to leave this record, because I know I'm about to disappear. Something followed us out of those tunnels, something that shapes the world in ways no one notices. I used to think we escaped, but now I know the truth. We never left. And you, are you sure you ever left? If Project Reese was so far from completion, why did the Allies rush to investigate it so quickly after the war? During Operation Paperclip, numerous Nazi scientists were secretly brought to the US and put to work at NASA. Strangely, in the following years, American technological development skyrocketed, leading to the creation of the first rockets that would eventually take humans to the moon. Some theorists believe the Nazis weren't just building weapons. They were trying to replicate alien technology, something they found somewhere on Earth, or something that was brought here from another place. And what if the Americans didn't? Just take Nazi scientists? What if they took something else? Something that should have never left Reese? What still lies hidden in the depths of Reese? The silent corridors of Project Reese still stand, forgotten by time. Many tunnels remain sealed, untouched for decades. The few explorers brave enough to enter have reported strange anomalies, from inexplicable voices to electronic failures with no logical explanation. The documents were burned. The scientists vanished. But something in there never left. Project Reese wasn't just a bunker, a factory, or a refuge. It may have been the epicenter of something that still shapes the modern world today. And the question no one dares to ask is, what else surfaced when those tunnels were opened? Maybe, just maybe, the real secret of the Third Reich is still shaping the fate of humanity from the shadows.